You finally decided to buy a Wavestate, and when it arrives, the first thing you do after unboxing this little nerd magnet and wiring it up is, like basically anyone does, check out some of the presets. You suddenly realize it has everything you wished for and you feel the need to put on some glasses and a hat. Although there's no sunshine in your dark man cave. But it's all about that vibe. Next thing you do is tweak some knobs and press some buttons and whoa, the sound changes. This seems to be easy. And then you go back to the first performance, which is the init performance, and then you try to create something from scratch. Step 1. Make sure you download the Wavestate Editor Librarian, which is free. Check the download link in the description. It's quicker and easier to create your own performances with the software than only using the hardware synth controls. You can also see everything much better on screen, especially what's going on with the wave sequencing lanes. Step 2. Read the manual. Take a day off and go through the whole thing. You'll be surprised how fast you'll understand all the possibilities of this synth by just going through the whole manual. Best way to do this is by trying out the things you read about. Step 3. It's a good idea to have a certain goal in mind for what you want to create. One way to do this is by throwing some keywords together. For the sake of this tutorial, we'll be using the following keywords: strings, ambient and rhythm. Get inspired by browsing through all the different sample categories of your Wavestate. Step 4. Let's start by choosing some string samples first. After we created our loop, we can easily listen to every sample by holding the enter button and pressing on one of the numbers. Don't forget to undo this by holding the enter button again and pressing the activated number. Let's move on to the timing lane. For layer A, we're not going to use the X-Fade option. Most of the time we want to work with tempo mode enabled. So let's enable it by pressing Shift plus the timing lane button. Since we've chosen for the keyword rhythm, let's create something with various note lengths. We can create some variation by changing the probability of one of our 16th notes. Right now, we actually have a problem, because when this note is not sounding, it will add its length to the previous note. But this also means our samples are not lined up with our timing lane anymore. Of course, in some cases you want this randomness. But for this performance, we'd like the samples to be lined up correctly. Our solution is to copy our timing lane loop and set the probability to 0 for the 16th note. We just need to copy our samples in the sample lane as well and also put the probability to 0 for the sample underneath this step in the timing lane. Don't be scared to use a lot of steps. We can use up to 64 steps for each layer, so we have plenty of space to create our loops. We can also use a rest instead. We do have to put the probability at 100, also for our sample. Now let's undo this because the sustained version sounds better. We can use our pitch lane to create a slightly out of tune effect. We use 6 different steps. Step 1 is in tune, step 2 is slightly pitched downward, and step 3 the same amount but upward. Step 4 is also in tune, but step 5 is pitched downward, and step 6 the same amount upward. We also change the probability for the out of tune steps. This way the out of tune pitch lane steps are triggered more randomly. It's a very subtle change, but we don't want to overuse this out of pitch effect. For this layer, I'm not going to use the shape, gate and step sequencing lane. Step 5. Right now is a good time to start saving our performance now and then. Let's use the name Tutorial DIY. We can also save individual lane settings, which might come in handy for our next layers. Let's save the timing lane. Step 6. We can tweak our string sound even further by using a low-pass MS-20 filter. We'll use the filter envelope later in this video to mod our low-pass filter. Step 7. Now is a good time to take a look at our effects. For now, let's use a chorus for our mod effects and just use the default delay and reverb presets. Actually, for this layer, I'd like to use the reverb only. We can also enable our master EQ, but since we don't know what our performance will sound like with all the other layers yet, for now, let's leave it disabled. Step 8. Let's get back to our filter and link our filter envelope to the cutoff. With this modulation, the filter envelope controls our cutoff. Step 9. Sometimes we want to be able to control our modulations quickly. In this tutorial, we'll be using our mod wheel to control multiple modulations from different layers. This means we can use one single controller to modify the intensity of different modulations at the same time. We can also use our mod knobs for this. Layer B. For layer B, we want to create a subtle percussive layer. We'll be using two different woodblock samples for this. To randomize the sound, we enable random order. On our timing lane, we can use our saved lane from layer A. Remember that we have a pizzicato sample on layer A, and the goal of layer B is to accentuate this pizzicato sound with the woodblock samples. We can create some pitch variations by modifying our pitch lane. Don't forget to put the probability of A13 at 0 so it matches our timing lane. The sound of the woodblocks is quite aggressive, so we can use our shape lane to reduce the attack a bit. Don't forget to enable Shape Controls Volume. That's it for layer B. Now let's move on to layer C. For the next part of this tutorial, I already prepared layer C and D. Let's analyze these layers step by step. This time we created a sample lane loop that goes forward and backward. The timing lane uses two 1/8 notes, but we can also make a larger loop with added 16th notes. By modifying our timing lane loop, we can choose to modify our rhythmic note values. We can even use a modulation to control our loop. I will show you this in a moment by using our shape lane. We use our shape lane to control our filter cutoff. We can't use the shape lane as our modulation source, but it is possible to use the step sequencing lane as a modulation source. If we look at our step sequencing lane, we need to enable Use Shape On. This way our shape lane is linked to our step sequencing lane. As you can see, we used our step sequencing lane as the source for our cutoff. If we keep the value of just one step to +100, it simply uses our shape lane. We can then control the intensity like every other modulation. I also linked our mod wheel to this modulation as an extra intensity mod. This means that if we want our intensity to be at this amount, we need to turn the mod wheel all the way up. We don't want to use our mod wheel all the time because there are other modulations linked to it as well, and by default I want these shapes of the shape plane to control the cutoff all the time. That's why I also made another modulation underneath. So this means that if we turn the mod wheel all the way down, the intensity will be at 40. If we turn the mod wheel up, it will add another amount on top of that 40. We use the amp LFO to slightly control the volume. If we turn the intensity all the way up, this is how it sounds. I told you before that we can control our loop with a controller. If we set our start, end, loop start and loop end at the last step, we just need to create a modulation on our end step. In this example, I used the pitch performance knob and set the intensity all the way up. If we turn our performance knob, we are able to change our shape. Last but not least, layer D. Remember that I also used the keyword ambient? Well, layer D sounds like this. If we look at the sample lane, you can see that we used synth-based string sounds, and each sample is raised by 2 octaves. On our timing lane, we can see that we used X-fade and long note values. We also changed the probability of our last timing step to 30. This way it sounds a bit more random. We use a smooth attack and release on our amp envelope, and we also slightly use our filter to control our cutoff. We are finished creating our performance. Don't forget we can also enable our EQ and modify our master effects even more. Now all layers combined sound like this. Perhaps it could be used for one of your favorite TV shows.